state of Alaska, and that is, I'll just call it an issue that is pretty near and dear to my heart, and I think to the heart of many throughout the state of Alaska. And that is, I'll just call it an aberration in the fish world. And what I'm talking about is engineered salmon, GE salmon. This is an issue. Now, we just heard from the ranking member on the Senate Agriculture Committee. I appreciate the work that she has done, along with the senator from Kansas, to try to forge a path forward as it relates to GMO. But when we're talking about genetically engineered salmon, let me make very, very clear, we're talking about two very distinct and different issues here. This is separate from the larger GMO debate. Genetically engineered animals are not crops. And GE salmon is a genetically engineered animal. This is something entirely new. This is a new species. This is a new species that will be introduced, potentially introduced into our markets, into our homes, and quite possibly contrary to what any environmental analysis claims, enters into our ecosystem. So when we're talking about the GMO, the broader GMO debate here on the floor, keep in mind that when I stand up, when the other senator from Alaska stands up, when Alaskans stand up to talk about genetically engineered salmon, we're talking about an entirely different issue. Now, I get pretty wound up about this issue. I just came from a meeting of young people, about 20 young Alaskans from around the state, and I said, I'm sorry, I have to leave because I've got to go to the floor to speak to this issue that is so important to us in Alaska. And I said, do you all know what genetically engineered salmon is? And they're like, yeah, it's kind of that fake fish. It's that Frankenfish is what we call it. Because it is so unnatural. It is so unnatural that, again, it's something that as Alaskans we need to stand up and defend against. I grew up in the state of Alaska. I was born there. I know well that escapement from pens occurs in hatcheries, and it can occur in facilities where fish are grown. I also well know the immense value of our fisheries and the potential for havoc that something like this Frankenfish could wreak upon our wild, sustainable stocks. And so I'm standing here this morning saying that I will not be supporting cloture on this bill, as it's an issue that is just too important to so many and has not yet been adequately addressed. I have attempted to work with the chairman and the committee to offer sensible and what we believe are reasonable fixes, but no solution as of yet. So I am standing today demanding, asking that the voices of Alaskans who have stood in solidarity on this issue stand with me, because we will not accept that genetically engineered salmon or Frankenfish, whatever it is that you want to call it, we will not accept that it will be allowed to be sold without clear labeling, because I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to find that what I have served my family is a genetically engineered fish, and I use fish lightly. You know, we talk about Frankenfish, and some people kind of snicker nervously, but it's not a joke to Alaskans. This new species could pose a serious threat to the livelihoods of Alaskan fishermen, and I will stand to support the livelihood of Alaskan fishermen. Alaska's fisheries are world-renowned for their high quality, for their sustainability. The Alaska seafood industry supports more than 63,000 direct jobs and contributes over $4.6 billion to the state's economy. Nearly 1 in 7 Alaskans are employed in the commercial seafood industry. It's how my boys put themselves through college, was working in the commercial fishing industry. We know about fish. My family, for generations, has been involved in one way, shape, or form with the fishing business. Salmon is a major part of Alaska's seafood economy, and commercial fishermen around the state harvested more than 200 salmon this past season, including Chinook, sockeye, coho, chums, pinks, all wild. And as we all know, wild salmon, it's loaded with all the good things in it that God has placed there. Tremendous health benefits. It's a lean protein source of omega-3s, B6, B12, niacin, everything good, all in that natural wild package. More than 1.5 million people wrote into the FDA opposing approval of genetically engineered salmon. So you have groundswell of support around the country. This is not just from Alaskans weighing in, but people saying, no, we don't think that this should be approved. FDA went ahead anyway. Then you've got a growing number of grocery stores, Safeway, Kroger, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Targets. They've all announced they're not going to sell this. They're not going to sell this genetically engineered species in their stores. And yet, despite this immense opposition, in November of last year, the FDA approved Aqua Bounty's Technologies application for its genetically engineered Aqua Advantage salmon. So for those of you that are not fully informed on what this genetically engineered fish is, how it comes about, GE salmon starts from a transgenic Atlantic salmon egg. What happens, this is an ocean pout. It is a type of an eel. As you can see, doesn't look anything like a salmon, even if you don't know your salmon very well. This is a bottom-dwelling ocean pout eel. They take DNA, a splice of DNA from this, a splice of DNA from a magnificent Chinook salmon, and splice it into an Atlantic salmon egg. And that egg is meant to produce a fish that will grow to full size twice as fast as a normal Atlantic salmon. So this is the push here, to push Mother Nature, who creates a perfectly beautiful, fabulous salmon, and to take a splice of DNA here, a splice of DNA there, put it in an Atlantic salmon, which is a farm fish, and grow it so that it grows twice as fast as a normal fish. But growing it in a penned condition and theoretically so that there is no way for escape. But can we guarantee that there is no way for escape? I don't know, show me that. But what we have here, I think, is a fair question as to whether or not this GE salmon can even be called a salmon. So FDA signs off on this last November, but they made no mandatory labeling requirement. Instead, they said labels can be voluntary. So in other words, if you want to say that this piece of fish that's in front of you in the grocery store is genetically engineered or not real, you can voluntarily put that on your label. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to voluntarily say this is genetically engineered. So what we have done, what I have done, is to fight to secure a mandatory labeling requirement both before approval of Aqua Bounty's application and since its approval. So we've been working hard on this issue, and we've made some significant headway. But what we're dealing with on the floor right now, this legislation, would wipe that work clean instead of using legislative tools at our disposal to effectively and precisely amend this legislation in order to address the issue of GE salmon. So what we did is we got some language in the omnibus appropriations bill that requires the FDA to not allow the introduction of any food that contains GE salmon until it publishes final labeling guidelines that inform consumers of that content. And so what this did, this kind of forced FDA to issue an import alert, which effectively bans all import of genetically engineered salmon for 1 year. But it also directs the FDA to spend funds, significant funds, no less than $150,000, to develop labeling guidelines and to implement a program to disclose to consumers whether salmon offered to consumers is genetically engineered. Again, what we want to be able to do is let consumers know whether this fish is genetically engineered or not. So we thought that that was a pretty clear labeling mandate to the FDA, but FDA then later came back to us and said they felt that there was still clarifying legislation that we needed to do. So I have worked with Senator Sullivan, my colleague from Alaska, as well as Senator Cantwell, Merkley, and Heinrich, and we introduced S-738, which is the Genetically Engineered Salmon Risk Reduction Act. And we also introduced a separate piece of legislation to respond to FDA's November approval, and introduced S-2640, the Genetically Engineered Salmon Labeling Act. And what that bill would do is kind of build on last year's omnibus provisions and would require labeling of genetically engineered salmon through language that I received through technical assistance working with the FDA on this. Additionally, we would mandate a third-party scientific review of the FDA's environmental assessment of Aqua Advantage salmon and the effects that these GE salmon would have on wild stocks and ecosystems, which in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many others, was insufficiently addressed during the FDA's environmental assessment. So we've been working with the FDA on this to develop this language to mandate labeling, and the FDA has been cooperative at this point working on this issue, and that really is a significant step forward. But it required me to do something which maybe others are perhaps a little more active, but to place a hold on a nominee. I placed a hold on the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf. This is not something I do lightly. I had not placed a hold on a nominee before. I don't take this action lightly, but it was necessary. It was necessary to bring to the attention of the FDA the significance of this issue and the seriousness of what we were dealing with. And so we got FDA to the table. We've been working with them. They've been listening. They've been helpful. And we are so close to resolving this. And now we are on the floor with the GMO legislation, which, again, as I said at the outset, GMO is different than what we're dealing with this genetically engineered species, a new species designed for human consumption here. So my concern is that with the GMO bill before us now, it really does threaten the good progress that we have made to this point in time. And it's not just the progress that the Alaska delegation made, but really the work of so many Alaskans, the bipartisan, hard-working efforts of so many around the country who share the same concerns. So I think we've offered some pretty sensible solutions, and I will continue to offer them. I will continue my efforts to work with the chairman, who I have great respect for, and know that, well, it's not opposition to the overall bill or its underpinnings. Where my concern remains is mistakenly allowing genetically engineered salmon into our homes, mislabeled as salmon. So this is something that we will continue to raise the awareness, raise the issue until we have finally and fully resolved it. Mr. President, if I still have a few minutes more time this morning, I'd like to switch topics and speak about the last great